The point is, I heard this saying a long time ago, but it really true today as it was back then. If the process is bad and you automate the process, the only thing that will happen is you're going to do the bad thing faster. Yeah.
Yes, you're
You
just going
know,
to do a lot of bad crap fast.
so
One of the lessons learned review from previous projects, you get into the argument about which is the highest priority or which apply
mhm.
to this project because, repeat after me, because this project is different.
Yeah, this project is different. We're different, right?
Welcome to Supply Chain Unlocked, decoding operations automation in the future of global logistics. Let's get into it.
All right, welcome back, guys. I have my guest, my once a week guest, I should say, Tom Brulette. We are going to discuss ERP implementation has gone wild. What stimulated this was on LinkedIn, there was a post by Sam Gupta who does a really good job of articulating some good messages and thought provoking posts. And that's what got Tom and I started. Let me give some thoughts so then you can respond to them. Over the past 5 years, documented ERP implementation failures have resulted in more than 1 billion in publicly reported financial losses. And then the other one is many of these failures occur at organizations with substantial budgets, mature governances, and access to tier one implementation partners. Tom, go ahead and react to that. That's what Sam had in there, and let's see what you have to say. Hey, can you do your brother a solid and mash that subscribe button and like button real quick? Now back to the video. Thank you.
I think it's a good topic because I don't know of too many people that actually have had a positive experience with a large scale ERP implementation. And the interesting thing I found from Sam's discussion is that the failure is not limited to smaller organizations or organizations that forego a tier one implementation partner. It crosses the board, which tells me there's something different. There's a different reason behind that. And I think there's two contributing factors. The main reason why I think we're seeing these types of failures is the big bang approach, trying to implement everything all at once. And the problem there is that when something starts to go wrong, you have multiple different errors that can occur, all compiling and adding to each other to just cause this failure. The second, and I think this is really a key factor as well, is viewing this type of implementation, a large scale implementation like an ERP or a customer relationship system, as a technology initiative rather than a business transformation that's supported by technology. And I think when you look at it simply as a technology initiative, it tends to discourage the business from fully engaging. Yeah.
And when you say that, I'm going to hit on this one point or question. Is it a decision making problem that we see?
I would say, I guess technically it is a decision making problem. First of all, you've decided to view it as a technology project rather than a business transformation.
Good point.
And the second is that you've decided to do a big bang implementation.
So two macro decisions are.
And the interesting thing is that even the companies, even the organizations that use the tier one implementation partner are experiencing failures. So that tends to tell me that it leads towards the execution and the big bang implementation.
Yeah. So let me add a tier to that decision making. Adding a tier one partner to this, or I shouldn't say adding, but anyways, how do we have so many of these failures where so many tier one partners are involved? And is it the decision of bringing a tier one involved, or is it the decisions internally that impact the tier one partner?
I think there's a couple of things. I think that I think it's the decisions made along the way, but I think that I tend to believe that it's the challenge is in the requirements and the process definitions. The issue that you have going into this, I think, in my opinion, is all of the ghost systems that the business is using to support their work. So what I mean by that is the spreadsheets or the ad hoc databases that the business where they extract data from the ERP, manipulate and analyze, and then update from the spreadsheet, the ERP, unless and until you have those clearly defined and accounted for so that you can eliminate them. I believe you just open yourself up for significant issues when you go live.
Yeah, I'm with you because so many other systems impact the actual project and those creep into it, which
Hmm.
still goes back to our previous episode of really the entire project behaving in sprints, not just the development. So, with that said, I'm going to take a minute before we transition to our second historical loop topic because it's on my mind. Guys, over the last couple weeks, we've never asked for you to subscribe or like, and if you can, please do that. So now, and one reason to compel that is I've been working with a consulting company that has just flat out not worked out. So you'll see it next week, and it's not so much advice, but maybe a public service announcement, a PSA, if you will, of my experience, what went wrong so you don't do the same thing. And why I'm saying that is I made some decisions along the way that there were red flags, and I just kept moving forward because I wanted to move the business forward. And the reason I'm bringing that up is based on decision making problems where there's red flags, but you just keep moving things forward. So give us a like, a subscribe, if you will. That way you get the next video that's up. That's really a PSA announcement for me personally. This does not involve Tom Brulette, but I just feel like my experience I can bring forward will help you out. Now, back to the show. The historical loop with ERP failures, why we keep repeating it. I think that's one thing that gets me. The post references famous failures that we all studied or heard about in business school, heard about on the internet. The Nike supply chain breakdown in 2000 and the Hershey's 1999 disruption. And it says that they're still taught today in business school and as well as computer science, et cetera, or project management courses. I still remember that to this day. And I graduated 2007, and those were hot topics then, and they are now. Tom, one other one is if the cases are known, why do organizations still repeat the same structural mistakes? Over to you, Tom. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the interesting thing, what we don't really know, what Sam doesn't really clarify is when an organization brings in a tier one consulting group or an implementation partner, we don't know if they've had a bad experience where they had a significant failure previous to that. But I think that focused on the implementation partner, I think the organizations make the leap of faith that the implementation partner is experienced and will guide you through those challenges. And obviously, based on the results, that's not true. I think added to that is the belief that we're different. I know those other people failed, but we're different and we understand the business and we understand what needs to be done.
We're different. Oh, that so triggers me. How many times have I heard that term, word different, on which project or what part of? I think it's every project I hear it or program I hear it, but yet the results are the same. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
That's
Sometimes
something
I
that,
wonder if people don't respond with a word different response to distract from the answers of the question or defining the requirement.
yeah, that's a good point. And nothing against organizations and stuff. I think it's a human behavior
Hmm.
response, period. And that's the way they get rid of any type of liability because there's no other thing that they think somebody's going to come back with. I guess
Exactly.
that's the best way of
Ex-
putting it.
Exactly. I've thought of everything that could go wrong. So I'm sure that we're good.
Yeah. Now, so I'm going to sort of transition that a little farther or step it forward. Often we don't sit down on a project and even have one meeting about what looks like the happy path, what looks like where everything went right. I'm totally flipping the coin there, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
To everything that could go wrong to everything that could go right. What does that look like?
Well, I don't know. You know, I have a tendency, I believe that looking at it from what could go right and everything that could go right from these tinted glasses where you only see rainbows and unicorns and sunshine and lollipops and everybody's dancing.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of how many problems can happen at the same time. And that is actually the reason why I feel like it makes sense to take a opposite viewpoint of this. That's where the that's where the release or the sprints come into play. Identify a distinct installable unit that becomes a release. You nail it down, and then you can verify that that piece works. Now, when you add another piece, you're adding value, but you're testing that integration. And generally speaking, in my experience, it's the integration points where all of these functions and processes start to touch or work together that the collisions occur and the disruption.
Yeah, good point. How often is the ERP partner blamed for problems that were actually operator model gaps? Oh, there's so much we can say here, but go first,
Every
Tom.
time,
How many times? How
every time.
often? Every. Man, you're using my word every.
Yeah, I think the tendency is for so that gets back to the we're different concept, right?
Yeah, I would
We're
agree with that.
different. We're smarter than that. It won't happen to us. Oh, wait, it happened? Can't be my fault because we're different and we're better. So it must be the implementation partner or the software.
What's the old saying? You hire IBM so you don't get fired?
Yep. Nobody ever got fired for IBM.
Yeah. And people still say that to this day consistently.
It's still
And well, and I think for two reasons. You made the right decision to bring in IBM. And the second one is when things go wrong, you can blame IBM.
exactly.
When
Exactly.
often it's gaps or lack of execution, period, in the organization that creates that. But you need a blame partner. Hey, holy crap, there's a coin phrase. I need a blame partner.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Who's going to be the fall guy?
That's going to be the hook for the show. I need a blame partner. Let's go hire an ERP partner. All right.
Oh, that could be I mean, you could have so much work, you'd never be able to keep up.
Yeah, should that be? Let's go find a blame partner. No, shit, that's good. All right. Let's transition before I just keep talking about that. Now let's unpack what mature governance is misses because governance can be real and still useless. You know, Sam says these companies had mature governance structures. Often they do. You can't really afford a decent ERP without $1 zillion. What does it actually mean in practice and why doesn't it prevent failure, Tom?
I think the key reason why it doesn't prevent failure is when people in the organization use it as a check the box exercise and not for the validation that it's meant to encourage. So you go into, if you've been using this governance structure for a long time, it is by rote that you're doing it, right? Oh, I got to submit this. I got to submit that. I've got to have a document attached to this approval request. And it's a matter of just kind of putting all the pieces and parts there so there's a traceable history and not how valid it is sometimes. I suspect that it happens more often than you might.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I think that causes an issue. And I think the other thing that causes an issue is the practice of capturing the issue, identifying a workaround that you will resolve sometime in the future. And then sometime in the future doesn't come until after you go live when all of the workarounds start to collide.
Ah, that's a good point. You know what I was going to say about governance often? It's such a trail of CYA, cover your ass.
Mhm.
And then you have this long trail and it's pretty much the breadcrumbs, if you will.
Right.
But rarely does anybody like walk back up the breadcrumbs. And nobody wants to point out if you did walk up by the breadcrumbs to throw the flag up and go, that's where we started going wrong.
Mhm.
And we don't do that because that would be calling out either leadership or team performance. And who's got the balls to do that?
Well, and everybody and people, and you have a tendency also to look at it as kind of a one-off. It'll never happen again, or yeah,
Uh,
we know better than that kind of a thing, you know?
yeah. Where do dependencies hide? Is it in the emails, the meetings, the tribal knowledge, or the
Tribal knowledge.
informal approvals?
I think it's a combination of tribal knowledge and informal approvals.
Nah, good answer right there. I was going to say in the meetings, but that gets really murky. All right,
Mhm.
sold. I agree with that one. That is where the dependencies lie and they come to fruition. And then it's very tough to explain what that tribal knowledge is to the point of we can't even use the word tribal anymore.
Right. Right. The thing that comes to mind is that the tribal knowledge is the tribal knowledge could be actually another term for ghost systems.
Oh,
These are things that aren't clearly defined, and if that one person, if Joe's not there and he's not answering the question, then you're not sure what's going to happen. I've been involved in a number of these large projects, big bang implementations, and you have the subject matter experts are identified and they attend the requirements and objectives meetings and define things, but not being the person that actually executes day in, day out, there's a tendency to overlook the details or miss the details. And so maybe a way to resolve that is after each design session, when you define the process flow, maybe the validation is to test it in reality, test it on the floor, test it in the business. Okay, I see this is happening. This is what we're saying happens. And you're sitting with the person that does it day in, day out. Is this what you actually do? And that will engage the people that will have a tendency to engage the people in the initiative so that they've got something, they're involved in it. They're part of the solution rather than just having the big bang dumped on them to try to figure it out.
yeah, I'm with you. That's man, you brought that up in the pre-podcast, and it took me a few hours for me to really think through or digest the word or words ghost systems.
Hmm.
And dang, dude, you're spot on with that. The stuff that comes out of the woodwork
Hmm.
with ghost systems is always there. And the second part is I don't know care how much governance that you throw on there, it's going to be very difficult to extract those. So I think we need to move on, but
I do too.
yeah, because we can go on and maybe we'll have a follow up to this. Maybe we'll have
Yeah,
Sam
each one
Gupta
of
on
these, honestly, Teddy, each one of these sections could be its own topic.
episode. Yeah. All right. Let's transition. Let's go to the current evidence in the post 2024 examples and talk about what those signals mean, meaning some modern examples, some outcomes, etc. In Sam Gupta's post, the post says in 2024 alone, a medical device manufacturer filed a $172 million lawsuit after an ERP program collapsed and a food manufacturer disclosed 135 million in lost revenue in a single gosh darn quarter after a troubled rollout. Obviously it's in different industries and it's probably repeatable root causes. If you had to bet, what failed first, data processes, training, or executive decision gates? Go ahead, Tom.
I think, okay, so let's talk about the Big Bang. I think one of the key factors in failure from a Big Bang implementation is the training and adoption of the new process and the new system. I think, though, that once you that's an easy answer, and you have to dig deeper into that to understand that, it really, the process definition and then the accuracy of the data that's collected are two additional huge factors in the failure. But it all comes back to, I mean, the initial reaction to the big bang is caused by lack of not lack of training, but timing of training and the adoption of the new process and procedures. And what I mean by that is when you're when you are replacing an ERP, the tendency is for the people on the floor, people on the line, to want to do the same exact thing that they did with the old system on the new system. And so that's where the adoption comes into play. They're not going to adopt the new system because they're still married to the old system, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Well, it does to me, but I've been talking about this. We'll have Sam Gupta on, and he could chime in with that a little bit. What do
Yeah,
you
that'd
think?
be interesting. I think that'd be great. I think you should tag Sam when you post this.
Well, I'm definitely going to send this over to Sam. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. Okay, so it's not mainly software, right? What
No,
is the root cause?
the
You got a
the
little
root
jumpy
the
there,
root
Thomas.
the root cause is related to the people.
Oh yeah, decision problems, etc.
Mhm.
Sam's post asks whether these are decision-making problems long before technology is deployed. What are the top decision gates that must be locked before you configure?
Who owns the transaction? What data is required? You got to define the operational model by process area. Another big factor is the fallback rollback plan.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm going to take it all the way back. Did you say this, the operating model or the
Yeah,
processor? I think you said that. Um, Quite often, I find that the operating model is never even looked at, frankly.
no,
I mean, it is just not looked at almost at all. To say this is what's broke and have a definable
right.
pieces within that operating model of what we are moving forward to fix.
Right. Right. That's the point is I heard this saying a long time ago, but it really, I mean, it's just as true today as it was back then. If the process is bad and you automate the process, the only thing that will happen is you're going to do the bad thing faster. Yeah.
Yes, you're
You
just going
know,
to do a lot of bad crap fast.
so that's where you come into it. It's the operate. I think, you start with who owns the transaction. Then you get into the operating model and process area, defining that. And then you got it. Then you got to get into, I think, a topic that's missing here is the ghost systems. Once you've defined the operating model and the process area, I'm looking at a small piece, whatever that piece might be, a forecasting. Here's what I see on the system. Now, you got to go out to the line, the people that are actually doing this work, and find out how they're doing it. What spreadsheets are they using? Who are they talking to make these decisions? Because if that doesn't align with your new process model, you're just going to keep driving into the ditch.
Right. All right, let's keep moving here. I got one other one here. Give one example of an operating model decision that teams postpone and it explodes later. Well, I think
Validation.
we already defined it. I should say one more.
Yeah, I think validation is a big part of it.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
The testing of it. And testing opens up a whole new can of worms because generally speaking, testing is in at least in my experience, testing is one of those things that the team has a tendency to reduce too quickly. So if something takes longer to do, rather than extend the entire timeline, they take time out of testing.
Yeah, I got you. All right. Now we make this actionable. What does real ERP readiness look like? So I'm going to say something as we transition into this. It's very good to stand and back and look at this in so many ways. Let's call it Monday morning quarterbacking. And the reason I'm bringing that up is Gupta's post really talks about all of this just like we are.
Hmm.
But it is very difficult to stand in the trenches, or what I always say, face the line on Sunday afternoon and be able to make all of this happen. And one reason why is our culture within big organizations in the era that we are in globally. It's not just difficult to pivot, but it is very difficult to raise the red flag and say, I know this is wrong. I got cognitive dissonance when it's a job for you and your reputation and your likeness is all based on just staying in some conformance with the organization.
Hmm.
And so keeping that in mind as we move towards what is the readiness checklist, this isn't easy and that should be recognized. Yeah. And you thought I was going to continue to go on, didn't you?
I think you're right. Yeah, no, I kind of did. I think you're right though. That's a challenge, and I'm not sure how you address that challenge because everybody, you go through to go, no go, 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 go. Everybody says go. And then if the last guy comes along and he's got a problem, but everybody else says I'm good, there's a tendency to gloss over. There's a tendency to say go and cross your fingers, you
Yeah,
know.
I've had one with one of my large companies that I work with. About 2 years into it, I have a high level of likeness inside the organization. And we went into a go, no go. And I said, as the project manager, my recommendation is to not go. And here's the impact if we not go. And here's the impact if we go. Well, I had a director that got behind me on this, but he did before the call.
Hmm.
That was very difficult to do, but I did a lot of prelim work before we did that.
Right.
And we had a full schedule of impact from a schedule and a monetary or a schedule and money perspective.
Hmm.
And we moved that forward. So it's possible. You just have to have a high level of likeness and logic and get the right people involved to be able to do that. Let me move us
Yes.
on a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
Tom,
A
did you have a comment?
conversation without emotion. That you have to have that conversation without emotion.
Yeah, and you got to have a high level of likeness in the organization.
By that, I
Some nobody,
assume you mean respect and right.
yeah. Well, I think
Hmm.
it even goes beyond respect. You got to be liked. If you're a
Hmm.
pain in the butt, or you're just constantly somebody like taunting people, or just constantly coming out with negative stuff without solutions, your likeness factor just dwindles or dives. One of the
Yeah.
two. All right,
And then
I'm
what
like,
happens is, and then what happens is there's a tendency of the team to let you touch the fire, if you know what I mean.
all right, we're digressing. I totally agree with that. We're just digressing quite a ways. All right. Here's the operator lens. ERP doesn't invent complexity, it forces you to define it. So, readiness is designing the operating model so the system can enforce it. Oh my
Right.
gosh, you're going to define and write the complexity? That would amount to writing out the workflows of how everything works and then matching that up to how the ERP is going to address it. We used to do that at a company you and I was involved in when we would take
Mhm.
over a warehouse. I
Right.
can't remember what the heck we
Right.
called those things, but they were the workflows, right?
Right. Right.
And boy, could you start seeing where the WMS in that case was not picking that up. So a lot of times we had to redefine the workflow
Right.
to work with the WMS, or better yet, there was such a gap that sometimes we had to tweak the software, right?
Right, right, right.
So that was
And
really
and
the
traditionally in the implementation in the software implementation world, the professional services from the software vendor and or the implementation partner will tend to encourage them to accept change requests and to modify the software, to modify the flow because they're making money on it. I'm not being that may be a cynical viewpoint. They want to support the customer, and the customer is always right. It just helps that when you're making more money from helping the customer like that. And then that adds complexity to the issue because you're not sure what that's going to impact in the next process that you're feeding into.
yeah, that's a good point. Well, give us a checklist, Tom.
Well, I think
Let me give
the
one that
big
Tom
thing
always likes to let me give one that Tom
yep, yep. Teddy's experienced my like for a good RACI chart. There's nothing like a good RACI chart for a large implementation. But you have to understand who owns and who supports and who's responsible for the activities. And that's how you do it. And many times it's an interesting discussion when you start to assign people to that because everybody has their own assumptions. And the first thing that everybody wants to do is they're more than happy to provide their input. They're a little bit hesitant to accept full responsibility and ownership. So I think the RACI chart is probably the biggest point. The decision gates. I think as we've been talking about this, I think I would add one more decision gate, and that is the physical walkthrough of the business process that you've defined with the team that is handling the process in the legacy application, the legacy system.
Yeah.
I
And
think
that
you have
doesn't take much.
no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. The problem is everybody's real busy.
Are they really? Are they that busy?
No, but I think that I wonder how much of a cultural aspect there is involved in this because much of this is, I refer to it as the you know what I need mentality. I don't want to get into the details because you already know what I need. You define it and then we'll implement it. But you understand what I need. And it's that, and that flies in the face of the assignments that you've identified in the RACI chart, right? That allows somebody to walk away from responsibility.
Yeah. Good point. The other ones are give me your thoughts on master data, training, and then the measurement after the fact of the success.
Well, the measurement, you got to have the measurement. And I'm not so, when I think of good, when I think of defining what good looks like, I think of it from a return perspective. And so when you are defining the process, you're defining the requirements, the next thing you define is the KPIs. How are you going to measure it? And what are your expected results? So that you could come back a month later and say, yes, I'm getting the expected results and the return. I'm achieving the cost improvements, the process flow improvements, the timeline. I'm able to do it faster, which in and of itself is a ROI. So I think you need to do that. But a big point is the training. And um, uh, everybody does training, and I think the most common method of training is a train the trainer model where the vendor or somebody comes in and actually develops the training material. They train the people that are going to be training the floor, and then those people go out and train the end users. And the problem with the current training practice and execution is more often than not, the training is performed too early, too far away from the implementation, and there's a tendency to forget or not remember the details. I'm a big believer now in the power of the help function, the help function in the application itself. And if you could increase the help function, so if somebody doesn't know how to do something, do one thing, they can hit a help button and have somebody walk through it or have the system walk through it because that's how they're going to learn it. But I think that's a big part of the failure that's realized. But then the master data, it's the quality of the data that's
And let me
going.
comment on the training thing real quick. And I may have missed it because had an email shot in front of me there that was high level or high priority. I often find that training has all these silos or all these people
Mhm.
in separate departments training for their piece. It's the cross functional that doesn't happen. And one reason why we don't want the cross functional from a large organization perspective is that's going to open up another can of worms, right? And what is an ERP? That is all about, or a WMS. That's
Mhm.
all about cross functional or cross application as well.
Mhm.
The order management rolls into the WMS, et cetera. And the ERP, the finance pieces roll into the HR pieces, all this. And when it comes to training, we don't do cross functional training. And if you do, call it out, throw it in the comments, show us some of your examples. We'd love to see some of that. So
Yeah.
go ahead and throw that in there. I'll get off the pulpit, off my
Yeah.
box on the training.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I like that.
And a master data ownership. Oh my gosh. Roulette and I have had an experience. Well, pretty much every project has a master data problem, right?
Uh-huh.
Where does it live? And is it in multiple databases, et cetera?
Right. That's where the silos start to really have an impact.
And is that where some of the tribal knowledge in IT comes out of,
Yep.
operationally, et cetera?
Yep. Each one of these has its own tribal knowledge aspect, right? The process flows, the data, the master data, training, they all have an aspect of it.
Yeah. So transitioning now, the post implies, meaning Sam Gupta's post, lessons are available. So why don't lessons learned stick? Let's tackle the institutionalization. Why don't they stick? Sam points out 25 years of lessons exist and we're still repeating it. Why don't organizations internalize these lessons learned? You want me to go first, Tom?
Absolutely.
Lessons learned. Let's do it. We're going to do it after a big project. We're not going to do it after each sprint, as we suggested in the previous video. And then we're going to rapidly go through that meeting or two. We're going to put that on the shelf. and we're not going to revisit it. That's reality.
Yeah, and I think a big factor there is exhaustion. By the time you get to that lessons
Good one.
learned process, you're so damn tired of this whole thing that
Yeah.
you want to pick the box and move on.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've brought up lessons learned going into the next project, and you want to see one of the lessons learned review from previous projects. You get into the argument about which is the highest priority or which apply
Mhm.
to this project because, repeat after me, because this project is different.
Yeah. This project is different. We're different, right?
Yeah, we're different. All right. Before we just continue to beat that over the head, let's close with big questions. What should CIO, CFO, COOs do over the next 12 months, 90 days, etc.? In other words, the call to action Monday morning. What do we feel that they need to do over the next 12 months?
Well, I would say if you're looking at it 12 months out, you're probably 2/3 into the implementation.
Yeah.
And the smart ass in me says, strap in for a bumpy ride. I think 12 months out, that's when it really makes sense to go and review your implementation plan, review your test plans and test results, review the training material. I think a big thing in there, it sure would be nice to know 12 months out that each of the processes you've defined is workable for the people doing the work. In other words, a walkthrough with the people in the department doing the work just to validate, because it's better to understand early than it is when you've got 100 other issues popping up around
Can I call that the operational review that's really as we land the plane, or
you.
there before that? The flight attendants or the captain's going to come aboard and say, "Start preparing for landing,"
Right.
and then there's the actual preparing for landing. This is the start preparing for landing is the 12-month, right?
Right.
Assuming like a 3-year project. Let's go to the 90-day highest blind spot. And I think the highest blind spot for the 90 days is knowing that you should have a moderately detailed plan on what does cross-functional training look like.
90 days
Uh,
out, you should start planning the training and developing. You should have reviewing the training materials.
yeah. And
Right.
should I say cross-functional, cross-application training?
Yeah. Yeah.
All
I
right.
think another thing to do 90 days out is to review the change requests list, history and outstanding, and then review the issues list based on priority, test issues mainly, because that'll give you a chance to understand. You'll understand better if you are in the kind of shape you're in. If you're 90 days out and your change requests are 10 pages long, then we should question what's going on
And make some
and
some
make
more
some hard
decisions.
decisions. Yeah.
All right. In closing for the calls to action, what's the single metric that best predicts a painful go live? And I think you already talked about one. There's probably other two. I'm going to go ahead.
I think the exceptions, and I think the thing to look at is the exception velocity. When I go
Mm,
into a test, am I experiencing the same number of problems with each of these tests, or am I learning and improving as I go along? And the other thing, I think it would be good. This can be a lot of work, but it sure would be nice to do a comparison of a week in the life, let's say, on the legacy and on the new system and
yeah.
compare differences.
Yeah. I'm with you. All right. In closing, ERP failures are not rare. They're just rarely measured publicly. And when you look at them, the pattern repeats across industry. And I'm going to reflect again that it's not just publicly or not publicly. It is not almost it's impossible to stop that freight train. And as an employee of the company from the director level down, who wants to stop that freight train and raise the red flag and then walk back into all of the breadcrumbs that should be part of the governance process where things are on the rails?
Well, and that's why it's so important to have a business leader
Yeah.
and
Yep.
not And by leader, COO, CFO, CEO, it would make sense that the CEO would be intimately involved in a major ERP implementation because it impacts so much of the business.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, if the operating model and decision gates aren't defined, the system will enforce the gaps as rules. That's really getting to what we already discussed.
Mhm.
That's why readiness beats configuration. I think I missed that previously. Anyhow, Tom, thanks for breaking this down like an operator. Thanks for the conversation, the insight. I think it's real value packed for the audience once again. And I thank the audience for listening this far into it. And I hope to have Sam Gupta. Hopefully, he'll join us in a future episode to talk through this from his perspective. It'll be interesting. He has extended ERP experience and he articulates it quite
Mhm.
well. So, based on that, thank you for your time and have a good evening.
Welcome to Supply Chain Unlocked, decoding operations automation in the future of global logistics. Let's get into it.